Lip dip, lip dip, lip dip, lip dip, lip dip. What's that I hear? Is that your hearts pumping with excitement as we start a new topic on transport in humans? In the last topic, we looked at how substances were transported inside plants in their xylem and phloem. And now we're going to move on to talk about how the transport of substances happens in humans. Now, it's a big topic, and some people feel a bit like this in the cartoon when they go through this topic. They think, when I was a kid, I thought the heart looked something like this, very innocent and simple, and then one day the teacher drew this diagram. It's so complex. But don't worry, we're going to get our heads around this topic together. So let's start with the basic question of what kinds of organisms need a transport system. Well, in the last chapter, we saw that most plants need a transport system. But how about animals like babies or ants, and also these single-celled, unicellular organisms like an amoeba? Well, it turns out that only larger organisms need a transport system. You see, if you were a small organism, for example, that unicellular amoeba made out of only one cell, right? This is the nucleus. Okay, if you were a single-celled organism, you could just exchange substances with your environment directly by diffusion. For example, oxygen could just diffuse into the cell directly. However, if you are a larger organism like this baby, made out of many cells, imagine if you were a cell that was deep down inside the baby, very, very deep inside. It is not in contact with the environment. It cannot just take in oxygen by diffusion. If oxygen was to reach the cell by diffusion alone, it would be too slow, it would take too long. Hence, a transport system is needed to ensure that every cell in a larger organism gets the nutrients and substances that it needs efficiently. So what does a transport system do? Well, it transports substances from one part of the body to another part of the body. So what does the transport system contain? Well, if you think about Singapore's transport system, you would say it contains roads and the cars which move along the roads. How about the human transport system? Here's a picture of it, and here's a picture of the transport system in humans, or what we call the circulatory system. And it's made out of several components. So what do you see? Well, first you see the heart, right? And then all the blood vessels, and also don't forget the blood which flows within the blood vessels. So the transport system in humans contains three main components: the blood vessels, the blood, which is the fluid that flows through the blood vessels, and the heart, which is a muscular pump, a pump which creates pressure so that the blood, the fluid, can flow around the blood vessels. Now you find the same three components in other animals as well. For example, this fish, in its circulatory system, you will also find blood vessels, a heart to create pressure, and the fluid, the blood which flows within the blood vessels, the fluid which carries all the different substances within it. So in this first video, we're just going to cover very quickly what is found in the blood, the structure of the blood, and what are the functions of blood. Right? So again, structure and function, very important theme in biology. A simple question to get us going: blood, is it a cell, a tissue, an organ, or organ system? Well, if you recall from the first chapter, blood is actually a tissue. It is a fluid tissue, which is made up of many different cells. Usually when you think of blood, you think of this red liquid, slightly messy kind of thing that comes out of your cuts and wounds. But if you actually put blood into what you call a centrifuge, which is a device that spins test tubes at a very, very high speed, then you will see that the different components of blood can be separated out. So here's a test tube containing blood, and we spin it at a very high speed in a centrifuge, and you start to see the blood separate out into layers based on different densities. And you find that blood is made out of plasma, white blood cells and platelets, and red blood cells. So the different components of blood can also be seen if you take a drop of blood and you place it in a microscope slide and look at it under the light microscope. So here's something of what you would see. And you can see the different types of cells found in blood. So up here, we see the red blood cell. Okay, very distinct, right, because of its lack of nucleus. You can see a little more transparent area. Here, we have the white blood cell, very distinct because of this large nucleus. Over here, this little fragment, these are the platelets. And of course, the fluid, which all the cells are suspended in, that fluid is the plasma. Okay, so if you're given a microscope image like this, you need to know how to identify the different components of blood. Right, now that we know what the 4 components of blood are, it's time for us to get to know them better. So let's read our textbooks. Right, it's always a wealth of knowledge and resource there. So have a look at these pages. Okay, there are 10 pages, it's quite a bit, but have a quick read through. And I want you to also work on the table in your notes. So there's a table on page 2, and use the information in the textbook to answer these questions. Now, if you need some help, you will find some helping words on the last page of the notes. Right? So on the last page of the notes, you'll find some helping words to fill in the blanks as well. Alright, let's get going, and I'll see you after you have tried to fill in the blanks yourself. Alright, hopefully you have had a read through. Okay, and I'm just going to be highlighting a few points in the coming slides, but really please go and have a read through, because otherwise you'll be missing out on quite a lot. So the first component was our red blood cells, and you would have read that they have another name, erythrocytes. Okay, they live for about 3 to 4 months and they need to be replaced regularly. So they're produced in the bone marrow. So in your bone marrow, there are these stem cells, which can give rise to different types of blood cells. Okay, one of them being the red blood cells. Now, of course, the main function of red blood cells is to transport oxygen around the body. So how are red blood cells adapted for their function? Well, we already talked about this in the topic on cells, so just very briefly, okay, they lack a nucleus to contain more hemoglobin, right, inside their cytoplasm. Right, you already know that they have a biconcave shape to increase the surface area to volume ratio for that faster rate of oxygen transport. Okay, and finally, they also contain hemoglobin, which binds with and transports oxygen. Now, there's one more new point that you would have found in your textbook, and that's that the red blood cells are elastic. Alright, they're able to change their shape and to turn to this bell shape, okay, which looks a bit like this. Okay, they turn bell shape so that they can squeeze through very narrow spaces, such as the small capillaries inside the transport system. Now, this knowledge about red blood cells can help us to understand some pretty interesting things that happen around us. For example, have you ever heard of high altitude training? Right, some athletes actually train at very high altitudes. Right, they go running at very high altitudes on like mountains and all. Now, why do they do that? Now, the answer is related to something else. Now, if you go up to high altitudes and you look for the people who live there, you'll find that they have very interesting characteristics. One of them being that their cheeks are very, very red. Very, very red in color. So I'd like you to go back and think a bit about why do you think this is the case? Why is it at high altitudes these people have such characteristics? And it has something to do with red blood cells. Right, next we have our white blood cells, and you should have read that their main function is to protect the body by fighting against infections and foreign bodies like bacteria and viruses. Now, they come in 2 main types. First, the lymphocytes. Lymphocytes, their main function is to produce antibodies, and then we've got the phagocytes, which are the ones which will ingest and engulf the foreign bodies. Okay, so you can recognize them in this way. Usually lymphocytes are more round in shape. The nucleus is a lot more larger and roundish. And of course, in phagocytes, the nucleus is more lobed. Right, it's lobed in shape, and it's more irregular in shape. Okay, so this is a phagocyte, and its main function, right, is to ingest, to engulf foreign particles like bacteria. Okay, this process is called, surprise, surprise, no prizes for guessing, it's called phagocytosis. Alright, phagocytosis. So what happens is that the white blood cell will get very close to the bacteria, and it will actually extend out an extension to wrap around the bacteria and to engulf it within itself. Okay, the next kind of white blood cell, okay, is the lymphocyte. Remember the one that looks more circular with a more circular nucleus. Now the lymphocyte's main job is to produce antibodies. So these antibodies have three main effects on bacteria. Firstly, the antibodies might destroy the bacteria directly. Okay, so the antibodies can actually detect certain special proteins on the bacteria. Okay, the bacteria have special proteins called antigens on their surface. Okay, kind of makes them recognizable. So the antibodies will recognize and they can bind to the bacteria and destroy them. Now the second thing that antibodies can do is to clump the bacteria. So the antibodies here are actually clumping these bacteria together, and they clump them in order to make it easier then for the phagocytes to come and engulf them. Okay? Now the third thing that antibodies do is that they can neutralize the bacteria. They can neutralize the toxins which are produced by the bacteria. Okay, so three main effects you need to know. Antibodies can destroy bacteria, clump them together, or neutralize their toxins. Okay, next we have the platelets. Now the platelets, or the alternative name for them, the thrombocytes. Hopefully you saw that as well in your textbook. Okay, they are just membrane-bound fragments of cytoplasm, and they help mainly in the clotting of blood. We'll be looking at this in our next video for the exact process of clotting. Now finally we have the plasma. Now, the plasma is the fluid part of the blood, right? And it's mostly made of water, so 90% of it is water, and the rest of it are substances which are dissolved inside it. Now these include a lot of different things, and you need to know what are some examples. Okay, so let me start with the easy ones. Okay, first you'll see that they're dissolved food substances, like what we learned in our previous chapter. Okay, glucose can be dissolved in the plasma. Okay, glucose is transported in the blood, right? Okay, then sometimes we have hormones as well, like insulin, which we learned about in human nutrition. Okay, so hormones can also be carried around in the blood, dissolved in the plasma. We have dissolved mineral salts like calcium. We have dissolved proteins like fibrinogen. You'll learn about this in our next video. And finally, we have dissolved excretory products, products which are meant to be excreted and removed from the body. For example, urea. Remember urea from our human nutrition chapter, urea, which was the result of deamination, breaking down amino acids. Now this is transported in the plasma as well to be carried away to the kidney to be excreted from the kidney. And finally, this is very important, hydrogen carbonate ions. And we'll see in the coming chapters, in the coming lectures, that this is actually how carbon dioxide is transported. Okay, carbon dioxide is actually transported as hydrogen carbonate ions in the plasma. Okay, so carbon dioxide goes into the blood, changes into hydrogen carbonate ions, and is transported in the plasma. Alright, that's all for this video. So in the next video, we'll be looking more at the functions of blood and especially at clotting. I'll see you there.